The ink, a deep and venomous black, was the only thing that felt real to Alara Vance in the gilded cage of the Mayfair ballroom. Around her, a symphony of silk and laughter swirled, a cacophony of pointless chatter about the weather and the latest scandals. She stood by a marble column, a vision of composed elegance in a dress of pale lavender, her gloved hands folded demurely, a faint, polite smile etched onto her face. It was a mask, one she had perfected over 27 years of navigating the shallow waters of London's high society. Behind the mask, her mind was a world away, in a rain-lashed graveyard on the Yorkshire moors, where a heroine named Isabella was fleeing a spectre with eyes of polished jet and a heart colder than the tombstone she hid behind. Alara was, to all who knew her, the quiet, perhaps slightly dull, daughter of the late industrialist Sir Robert Vance. She was a fixture at these events, a listener, a wallflower of impeccable breeding. They saw the delicate curve of her chin, the wide, doe-like brown eyes, but they never glimpsed the tempest that raged behind them. They did not know that the demure Miss Vance was, in fact, Aurora, the most celebrated and enigmatic author of Gothic novels in all of England. "A penny for your thoughts, Alara," a voice chirped beside her. It was Lady Fitzwilliam, a woman whose intellect was as substantial as the gossamer wings of a butterfly. "You look so terribly serious." Alara's smile widened a fraction, a practiced, meaningless gesture. "I was merely admiring the crystal work on the chandelier, Lady Fitzwilliam. It is quite magnificent." It was a lie as smooth as the satin ribbons in her hair. In truth, she had been mentally composing the final, chilling paragraph of her latest manuscript, The Cursed Heir of Blackwater Hall, where the hero would discover that the curse was not upon the house, but within his own bloodline. Later that evening, ensconced in the sanctuary of her private study, a room of dark wood, overflowing bookshelves, and the comforting scent of old paper and fresh ink, Alara shed her society skin. Here, she was Aurora. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to breathe with the story she told. She unfolded the crisp edition of the London Chronicle, her heart swelling with a familiar, secret pride. The review was in. Aurora's Whispers from the Abbey, the column read, is a masterclass in the modern Gothic. With prose as dark and rich as a moonless night, she weaves a tale of psychological terror that transcends mere ghost story. The author, whoever they may be, possesses an uncanny understanding of the human heart's darkest corners, a profound and thrilling talent that continues to elude and captivate the literary world. She traced the words with an ink-stained finger. This was her life's blood, her true purpose. The money her novels earned, discreetly funneled through her astute solicitor, Mr. Davies, afforded her an independence no woman of her station could openly claim. It was her freedom, purchased with phantoms and fear. The following Tuesday, however, the weather changed. Mr. Davies, a man of few words and impeccable discretion, visited her at home. His usual calm demeanor was fractured by a furrow in his brow. "There is a development, Miss Vance," he said, placing a different periodical on her desk. The Westminster Review, a journal known for its razor-sharp and often merciless criticism. The article was by Alastair Finch. The name was a brand of intellectual terror in literary circles. He was a young critic, not yet 40, but with a reputation for eviscerating pretension and dissecting flabby prose with surgical precision. He was feared and respected in equal measure. The title of his essay was a declaration of war, The Aurora Mirage, on the perpetuation of literary fraud. Alara's breath hitched as she read. For years, Finch wrote, the reading public has been enthralled by the specter of Aurora, an author who cloaks themselves in mystery, peddling a formulaic brand of melodrama that passes for profundity. The prose, while superficially elegant, is riddled with cliché. The psychology is shallow, the terror manufactured. This Aurora is not a genius of the macabre, but a clever merchant of sentiment, a hack preying on the gullible tastes of the masses. I make this pledge to my readers. I will dedicate my every resource to unmasking the individual behind this pseudonym. It is a duty to literature itself to drag this charlatan into the light of day and expose the mundane reality behind the carefully constructed myth. The paper trembled in her hands. A cold dread, sharper than any she had ever conjured for her heroines, trickled down her spine. Alastair Finch wasn't just criticizing her work. He was threatening her very existence. To be unmasked would mean social ruin, the loss of her cherished anonymity, and the end of Aurora. She would become a freak, a spectacle, the quiet, spinsterish Miss Vance who wrote lurid tales of haunted castles and doomed love. The freedom she had carved out with her pen would vanish overnight. For days, the shadow of Finch's threat loomed over her. She couldn't write. The words felt stale, the scenarios hollow. Fear was a poison to creativity. She read everything she could find about him. He was a self-made man of intellect, from a modest background, who had carved his own path through sheer force of will and a formidable mind. He was unmarried, notoriously private, and known to frequent the lectures and debates of the Royal Society. He was a creature of logic and light, the absolute antithesis of everything Aurora represented. And then, in the deep, silent hours of the night, a plot began to form in her mind. It was her most audacious yet, a story she would not write, but live. It was reckless, dangerous, and utterly Gothic. If Alastair Finch was a hunter, she would become the bait. She would not hide. She would step into his light, not as Aurora, but as a woman he would never suspect. She would seduce him. To seduce the critic was to silence him. A man in love, or in thrall, could not destroy his beloved. He would be compromised, his crusade rendered a personal, not a principled pursuit. He would have to choose between his integrity and his heart. It was a villain's plan, and for the first time, Elara felt a thrilling, terrifying kinship with the antagonist of her own stories. Alastair Finch's world was one of stark clarity. His study was a testament to this. Walls lined with orderly bookshelves, a large, unadorned oak desk, a single, well-proportioned window that let in the clean, white light of day. There were no frivolous decorations, no sentimental clutter. Here, ideas were dissected with precision, and sentimentality was the first thing to be excised. He read the letter again, his lips pressed into a thin line. It was an invitation to a private literary salon hosted by the formidable Dowager Countess of Ashworth, a patroness of the arts known for her sharp wit and even sharper eye for talent. Such events were usually a tedious parade of pretension, but the Countess had hinted at the presence of several interesting minds, including the reclusive historian Mr. Sterling, whose work on medieval jurisprudence Alastair actually admired. He decided he would attend. There was always the chance of finding fresh game for his critical eye. The salon was a markedly different affair from the ballrooms Elara usually endured. The conversations were louder, more earnest, peppered with Latin phrases and heated debates on romanticism versus enlightenment. Elara, positioned near a globe of the world that was taller than she was playing a new role, the intellectually curious, slightly sheltered gentlewoman. It was a careful performance. She had to be intelligent enough to be intriguing, but not so learned as to be threatening. She saw him the moment he entered. Alastair Finch was not a classically handsome man, but he possessed an arresting intensity. He had a lean, angular face, a strong jaw currently set in an expression of mild disdain, and dark, penetrating eyes that scanned the room as if categorizing its inhabitants into folders of worthy and dross. His hair was a deep brown, unruly despite an attempt to tame it. He wore his simple, well-tailored coat like a suit of armor. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird in a gilded cage. This was the man who wanted to destroy her. Taking a steadying breath, she waited for her moment. It came when he detached himself from a group debating Byron and moved towards the bookshelves, his gaze scanning the spines. Elara drifted towards the same section, pretending to search for a volume. Her hand, as if by chance, reached for the same book his fingers were approaching, a collection of essays by David Hume. Their hands did not touch, but their proximity made him start. He pulled his hand back, his dark eyes fixing on her with an unnerving focus. "My apologies," he said, his voice a low baritone, exactly as she had imagined it would be, clipped and precise. "No, please, it is yours," Alara said, letting her own voice soften, laced with a carefully measured warmth. She met his gaze and then looked away, a flicker of demure hesitation. "I was merely admiring the binding. I find I often judge a book by its cover, despite all admonishments not to." A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. "A dangerous habit, madam. Covers can be deeply deceptive." "Indeed," she said, turning fully towards him. "But is not the act of peeling back those deceptions part of the thrill? To find the true substance beneath the gilt?" Alistair's eyebrow quirked. This was not the usual vacuous commentary he expected from women in drawing rooms. A philosophical view of bookbinding. "You're Miss Alara Vance, are you not? I believe I saw you at the Fitzwilliam ball. You were remarkably quiet. And you, Mr. Finch, are remarkably loud in print," she replied, allowing a genuine spark of challenge to enter her eyes. "I have read your piece in the Westminster Review." His expression sharpened with interest. "Have you? And what did you think? Do you believe I am too harsh on this, Aurora?" Alara feigned a moment of thoughtful consideration, her heart pounding. She was discussing her own execution with her executioner. "I think you operate from a position of pure logic. You dissect the mechanism of the scare, but you do not seem to account for the pleasure of being scared itself, for the deliciousness of the shudder. Is there no room for that in literature?" "It is a cheap thrill," he stated, his gaze intense, locking with hers. "A manipulation. True literature should illuminate the human condition, not simply make one's flesh crawl." "But what if the crawl of flesh is part of the human condition?" she countered softly. "Fear, desire, the pull of the forbidden, are these not worthy of exploration, even in a heightened manner?" He was silent for a moment, studying her. He had expected a decorative plant, and found a cultivated, unusual bloom. "You argue your point well, Miss Vance. Perhaps there is more to you than meets the eye." "That, Mr. Finch," she said with a small, deliberate smile, "is what I believe all the best books and people strive to be." She excused herself then, leaving him with the ghost of her words and the scent of her perfume. Jasmine and night blooming cereus, a fragrance chosen for its subtle, nocturnal allure. The hunt had begun. The seduction was a novel in itself, each chapter meticulously plotted. Alara did not pursue him directly. That would have been too obvious. Instead, she made herself a recurring, intriguing presence in his orbit. She attended a lecture on Aristotelian logic he was known to favor, and afterwards, while taking a turn in the Society's gardens, she accidentally encountered him. "Mr. Finch," she had said, her tone lightly teasing, "I found myself applying your principles of syllogism to the plot of a novel I was reading. It fell apart quite dreadfully. Is that a failure of the author or the critic?" He had laughed, a short, surprised sound. "A failure of expectation, Miss Vance. A novel is not a theorem." "Is it not?" she had mused. "It has its own internal logic, does it not? Its own set of rules that must be obeyed for the world to feel real." They walked and talked, and Alara carefully revealed layers of herself. A feigned interest in his work, a pretended vulnerability about her own sheltered life, a sharp, observant wit that she let flash only occasionally, like a jewel turned briefly to the light. She asked him questions, drawing him out, making him feel seen and understood in a way he clearly was not accustomed to. Alistair, for his part, found himself disarmed. Miss Alara Vance was an enigma. She was of his world, yet seemed to observe it from a slight, ironic distance. She was beautiful, but it was a beauty that seemed secondary to the quick mind behind her eyes. He, who prided himself on his immunity to charm, found himself looking for her at events, feeling a jolt of disappointment when she was not there. Weeks turned into a month. Their conversations grew longer, more personal. He began to call on her at her home, their discussions ranging from philosophy to politics, always carefully steered by Alara away from the topic of Aurora. She learned that his relentless pursuit of truth in literature stemmed from a deep-seated aversion to the hypocrisy and performative sentimentality of the society he had fought so hard to enter. He valued authenticity above all else. The irony was a bitter pill she swallowed each night. In her study, she was Aurora, weaving her dark fantasies. By day, she was Alara, crafting a fantasy of a different kind for Alistair Finch. The line between her two selves began to blur. The emotional depth she was forced to employ in her deception began to seep into her writing. The cursed air of Blackwater Hall became richer, more psychologically complex, the hero's internal conflict mirroring her own. One afternoon, they were in her sunlit drawing room. A storm was brewing outside, the sky darkening prematurely. Alistair was pacing, energized by a debate they were having about free will. "You see, Alara," he said, using her Christian name for the first time, a victory she noted with a pang of guilt. "We are all products of our circumstances and our reason. To suggest otherwise is to indulge in romantic folly." "But what of passion, Alistair?" she asked, standing by the window, watching the first drops of rain hit the pane. "What are the choices we make that defy all reason? Are they not the most defining moments of our lives?" He stopped his pacing and came to stand behind her, not touching, but close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. "Passion is a tempest that clouds judgment. I prefer the clear light of day." She turned to face him, the storm outside reflecting the one in her own heart. "But is not the tempest also a part of nature? Is it not real and powerful and beautiful in its own terrible way?" Her voice was barely a whisper. He looked down at her, his intellectual certainty faltering for the first time. The logical, ordered world he inhabited seemed to recede, replaced by the charged atmosphere in the room, by the proximity of this woman who constantly challenged and intrigued him. He saw the pulse beating at the base of her throat, the slight part of her lips. "Alara," he murmured, his voice thick with an emotion that was not criticism. And then he kissed her. It was not a gentle kiss. It was a conquest, an admission, a surrender. It was everything Alistair Finch professed to disdain, a moment of pure, unreasoning passion. For Alara, it was a triumph more potent than any glowing review. But as his arms wrapped around her, pulling her close, she felt not the thrill of victory, but a devastating, unforeseen ache. The seduction was no longer a plot. It had become her prison. The kiss changed everything. Alistair, the man of unwavering principle, found himself entangled. His calls became more frequent, his demeanor softer. He started bringing her books he thought she would enjoy, his notes in the margins a glimpse into his brilliant, ordered mind. He spoke of the future, tentatively, of ideas and projects they could share. Alara was drowning in her own deception. The guilt was a constant, gnawing presence. She found herself hanging on his words, genuinely admiring his intellect, cherishing the way his eyes lit up when he spoke of a well-constructed argument. She loved the feel of his hand in hers, the solid, real weight of his presence. The man she was supposed to be manipulating had become the anchor in her double life. One evening, as they sat reading by her fire, he looked up from his book, his expression troubled. "My publisher is pressing me about the Aurora piece," he said, his voice casual, but his eyes watchful. "They want a progress report. My investigations have stalled somewhat." Alara's blood ran cold, but she kept her face a calm mask. "Perhaps there is nothing to find. Perhaps Aurora is simply a private person. Or perhaps they are more clever than I gave them credit for," he said, his gaze lingering on her. "The writing in the latest work, it's different, deeper. It's as if the author has experienced a profound shift, a personal awakening that has filtered into the prose. The terror is less about specters and more about the darkness within the self. It's brilliant, and it infuriates me that I cannot pinpoint the source." Alara looked into the flames, her character Isabella's plight feeling trivial compared to her own. "He is describing my feelings for you," she thought, a desperate, silent confession. "You are my awakening, and you are also my darkness." The turning point came on a night of furious writing. Alara was in her study, the door locked, pouring her turmoil onto the page. The climax of the cursed air was flowing from her, a raw, emotional confession woven into a Gothic tapestry. The hero was admitting his love for the very woman his family curse destined him to destroy. The pages lay scattered on her desk, fresh and wet with ink. She heard a firm, insistent knock at the front door downstairs. It was late, far too late for callers. A sense of foreboding gripped her. She quickly gathered the loose pages, stuffing them not in her locked drawer, but hastily into the large folio of botanical prints she used for pressing flowers, a place she deemed too mundane for anyone, especially Alistair, to look. She composed herself and went downstairs. Her butler was already opening the door. Alistair stood on the step, his hair tousled by the wind, his face pale and grim. "Alara," he said, his voice strained. "I need to speak with you. It's urgent." He stepped inside, his energy frantic. He had been at his club, he explained, and had overheard a drunken, boastful conversation between Mr. Davies's junior clerk and another man. The clerk, in need of funds, had let slip a crucial piece of information for a price. The identity of the author he represented, the author known as Aurora. The money had been exchanged. The name was his. "I have the proof, Alara," Alistair said, his eyes burning with a tortured light. "Or I will have it tomorrow. The clerk is to bring a document, a contract, to my office at noon." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of profound agitation. "Don't you see? This is it. My life's work, this pursuit of truth, it has led me here. But now everything is different." He took her hands in his. They were ice cold. "I came here tonight because I cannot do this without you knowing. This exposure, it will be a sensation. But after the scandal dies down, Alara, what I feel for you, it has changed me. This truth, which I have sought for so long, now feels like a weapon I do not wish to wield. Tell me what I should do." He was giving her a chance. He was offering her his heart and his career on a platter, and he was asking her to choose for him. The hypocrisy was staggering. He was willing to abandon his sacred principle of truth for a lie. For her. She looked at him, at the raw hope and conflict in his eyes, and her carefully constructed world shattered. She could not let him make that sacrifice. She could not live with the weight of this lie. The seduction was over. The truth, her own terrible truth, was the only thing left to give him. "Alistair," she said, her voice trembling but clear, "there is something I must show you." She led his stunned, confused form up the stairs to her study. She ignored the locked drawer that held her past manuscripts. Instead, she went to the folio of botanical prints and pulled out the fresh, ink-scented pages of the cursed air. She handed them to him, her hands steady despite the storm raging within her. She watched as his eyes scanned the page. She saw the moment of confusion, then the dawning horror as he recognized the prose, the style, the very themes he had just been praising to her moments ago. His face lost all its color. He looked from the pages to her, and the look in his eyes, the betrayal, the disillusionment, the shattering of his entire reality, was more painful than any social ruin he could have inflicted upon her. "You," he whispered, the word a breath of utter devastation. "All this time it was you." The mask was gone. Alara stood before him, not as the demure society miss, not as the clever seductress, but simply as herself. Aurora, the charlatan, the woman who had built their relationship on a foundation of deceit. "Yes," she said, her voice hollow. "I am Aurora." Alistair did not rage. He did not shout. The silence that fell between them was more terrible than any outburst. He let the pages fall from his hands, fluttering to the floor like dead leaves. "Every word," he said, his voice a hollow echo of its former strength. "Every conversation, every kiss. Was it all research? Material for your next great manipulation? Was I just another character in an Aurora novel?" "No." The cry was torn from her. "Alistair, it started that way. I confess it. I was so afraid. You threatened everything I was. But it became real. What I feel for you is the most real thing I have ever written, ever lived. You inspired the very pages you hold. You made my work better. You made me better. Better. He let out a short, bitter laugh. You lied to me. You used me. You made me question my own principles, made me consider abandoning the very core of who I am for a lie. Do you have any idea what that does to a man like me? You didn't just write a Gothic tragedy, Illyria, you engineered one. And I was the fool who walked willingly into the trap. He turned and walked out of the study, his footsteps echoing on the stairs. He did not look back. The sound of the front door closing was a final, deafening note. The days that followed were a blur of gray emptiness. The scandal, miraculously, did not break. Alistair must have paid off the clerk, buried the evidence. He had saved her, even in his devastation. It was his final brutal act of what? Love? Contempt? Pity? She did not know. His silence was a punishment far worse than any public exposure. She was free. Aurora was safe. And Illyria was utterly, completely broken. She tried to write, but the words were ash. The passion was gone, replaced by a profound grief. She had sacrificed her heart to save her secret, and in doing so, had lost both. She wandered the empty rooms of her house, a ghost in her own life. The Gothic novels on her shelf seemed childish now, their terrors pale imitations of the real, quiet agony of a lost love. Weeks passed. Then a small, plain package arrived for her. There was no return address, but she knew the handwriting. It was Alistair's. With trembling hands, she opened it. Inside was the manuscript of The Cursed Heir of Blackwater Hall. He had read it all, and throughout the margins, in his precise, sharp script, were notes. But they were not the eviscerating criticisms she feared. Beside a passage where the hero grappled with his betrayal, he had written, "The psychology here is masterful. The conflict is palpable, real." Next to a description of the Stormlash Hall, he had noted, "The pathetic fallacy is employed not as a crutch, but as a mirror to the internal state." Superb. And on the final page, where the hero chose love over his destructive legacy, Alistair had written a single, longer note. "I have spent my life worshipping at the altar of truth, believing it to be the highest virtue. I believe your work was a beautiful lie. I was wrong. You do not write lies. You write truths about the human heart, truths that are too complex, too shadowed, too terrifying for the clear light of day. They require the moonlight and the mist of your prose to be seen. You were the most authentic thing in my life, and I was too blinded by my own dogma to see it. I sought to unmask a fraud, and in doing so, I failed to recognize a genius, and the woman I loved. I cannot retract my public criticisms. My pride, what remains of it, will not allow it. But I can offer you this, and my silence, and my heart, if it is not too late." Tears she had thought all spent streamed down Illyria's face, spotting the paper. He had not forgiven her. The wound was too deep for simple forgiveness. But he understood. He had stepped into her world of shadows and found it more real than his own world of light. She did not hesitate. She went to her desk, not to write a novel, but to write a letter. It contained only 3 sentences. The critic was right. The author was a fraud, but not in the way he thought. She was a fraud for believing she could live without his heart, and she would like, very much, to discuss her revisions. She sent the letter and waited. The next evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, he came. He stood at her door, looking older, wearier, but the intensity in his eyes was now tempered with a hard-won humility. She opened the door, and for a long moment they simply looked at each other, 2 veterans of a war they had waged against each other and themselves. "Illyria," he said. "Aurora," she corrected softly, a tentative smile touching her lips. A genuine smile, the first she had ever seen from him that reached his eyes, finally broke through his solemnity. "Illyria," he repeated, stepping over the threshold and taking her hand. "I have come for the final chapter.